Hi everyone, and a warm welcomes to this month's episode of the Releasing the Real You show, where I chat with lots of different people all around health, well-being, and anything around that. And I'm really excited because today I have an amazing guest called Alison Petty. She's a mindset coach, but a mindset coach with a story. An inspirational story, actually, which she's going to share with us. And it's going to take her, me, and you from being in a wheelchair up to rock climbing and eventually into a mindset coach. So, warm welcome, Alison. How are you doing?
Hi. Hello, very good. Well, I've just come back from climbing, so yeah,
Hey,
feeling good, feeling happy. Always
fantastic.
happy. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about you, what you do, and how you got started, because I know you got an amazing story to share. So go for
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you for having me to speak with you today. I'm very excited to be here as well. And really, yes, very great honor. Thank you. So I have obviously I'm a mindset coach. I'm a certified advanced NLP coach and hypnotherapist. But the reason that I'm a coach is a very good one. So when I was 17 years old, I became very ill, very unwell. And 2 years later, I was just about to do my A levels, but I came down the really nasty virus. I also smoked cannabis for the first time, which you do when you're a teenager. And unfortunately for me, I had a very nasty reaction to it. So we do think it was perhaps spiked with something, but just one of those experiences in life that I would love to have not done now, but I did. And between those two things, between the virus and that reaction, I just became incredibly unwell. It was almost an overnight shift. So went from being a very healthy teenager who was very excited to grow up and one day become a rock climbing instructor living in the Canadian Rockies with my dog and my kayak and all of those great things, to suddenly being pulled out of school almost overnight and finding myself in chronic pain from head to toe, muscular, bone, joint, extreme exhaustion as well. And we didn't know at that time what was wrong. I was just like, bam, very, very unwell. It was 2 years later that I was given the diagnosis of fibromyalgia and ME, CFS, as it's known in the States, ME more so here. Yeah, and that was the start of the journey. And it was about 24 years of living with that diagnosis and
Oh,
those
wow.
symptoms. Yeah, it was a very long time. And I was certainly not somebody, as I say, I had very strong aspirations to grow up and live a very active life. And I was an incredibly happy and active teenager. So I was certainly not wanting to just spend 24 years just unwell. But we didn't know what was wrong. And I was going for all these medical tests all the time. And they were just coming back with negative results showing nothing wrong. I was, as was often the case, especially back then. My hope is that it is different now, and people are going for these, trying to find out what is wrong with them and getting these diagnoses, that I was just depressed, or, it was just all in the mind kind of thing. And very luckily for me, my mum and my dad would sit with me in surgeries, standing in my corner saying, this girl is not depressed. That is not what this is. Anyway, we ended up over those 24 years I tried all the different medications. Many of them made me feel so much worse. None of them really helped. And all the alternative therapies that I could try at the times. But again, for me, this was my journey. For somebody else, other people find different ways. But for me, I didn't find anything over those 24 years that helped at all. Over those 24 years, I had periods of time where I could function and do things, but I was always unwell. The symptoms were always with me, and I do not remember a time when they weren't, to different degrees. But then I had long periods where I was bedbound and having to use a wheelchair. I had an 8-year relapse in my late 20s to early 30s, where I had to go home and live with my parents again. They had to turn their lounge into a bedroom again for me, and looked after me for those 8 years and longer. There were patches of time, years, odd year here or 6 months here, where similarly I was bedbound, and not able to fend for myself, often on morphine at times for pain because it was that bad. And the last particularly big one was 2012 to 2016, where I had my own place at that time, but I was pretty much in a dark room for most of those 4 years, not able to tolerate light or sound. Again, chronic pain head to toe. My eyelashes would hurt. I'd often have to eat ice cream, because I couldn't bear food touching the inside of my mouth because of the hypersensitivity of the skin. My family would come and bring food and sit quietly by my bed and then do the washing up and then leave. You know, it was a very, very difficult time, and it was very hard to see any light at the end of that tunnel. But my transformational journey was in 2016 when, and I should say now, there's a much longer version of this story. If anybody wants to see it on my website, on my homepage, I'm giving you the nutshell now. So just alisonpetty.com, where I talk about this in much more depth. But I attended an NLP-based program, a training program called the Lightning Process. And as I say, there is a lot more to read about this on my website. And I'm also very happy to have conversations. If anybody would like to talk to me personally, please do get in touch. But the most important thing to say was that from being on that course, I was never in a wheelchair again. And more importantly for me, I never relapsed again. And over the course of about 8 months or so of diligently, essentially what I was doing was rewiring the neural structure of my brain, switching off the fight or flight response so that my body could heal. Again, I'm trying to make this very long story short, but when you're in a constant state of fight or flight, which, you know, the majority of us are these days, especially when you have a chronic illness, and when you're in fight or flight all the time, your body is constantly releasing chemicals, hormones, adrenaline, and all those wonderful things that usually help us run away from the bear, and then it switches off. But nowadays, you know, with divorce or bereavement, chronic illness, you know, house sale falls through, a lot of modern stresses, and we stay in this constant state of stress, and that's what causes something that's known as an allostatic load, and that's what was causing my chronic health condition. Underneath all that, my body was absolutely healthy. So when I switched that off by doing this technique repeatedly for about 8 months, rewiring that neural structure, that load was reduced and my body was able to heal. And I found that I was actually very healthy. And I've spent the last 6 years or so since rock climbing, mountain biking, living a very full life in my van at times for a couple of years here and there in the mountains of North Wales. And I now coach other people, help them figure out whatever it is that's holding them back. And as I sometimes say, their version of that wheelchair, whether it is a chronic illness or whether it's a mental health struggle, you know, even like phobias or overwhelm, stress, or just something that is for them is holding them back in life, maybe giving a presentation, or, you know, there's all these different kinds of mind blocks that just can stop us from moving forward sometimes. So that's my kind of very nutshell journey.
You went to that course in a wheelchair?
I was taken in. I actually didn't go in a wheelchair, but I had to be taken. And I was, oh no, I think maybe I did on the first day. I just remember being under a blanket with sunglasses and not being able to, you know, just being very afraid that it was going to make me worse, because I barely left my house, let alone my bed, in 4 years. And everything, you know, even making a cup of tea often would, you know, the symptoms, the flare-ups from things like that. So let alone, but.
And you walked out of there walking?
Yeah. And it was a very, very subtle shifts on the first day, you know, very subtle. But I was saying to somebody the other day, because in 24 years we hadn't found anything that had touched it, those tiny shifts that were almost imperceptible were huge in my brain. You know, they were like, that's something, you know, it's such a tiny thing now, that it was enough to be like, something's different. You know, it was like a big bell going off of like, something is different, keep going, keep doing this. It was a 3-day course. And then, I mean, I fell in love with neuroplasticity and NLP as well, you know, in an instant, in a heartbeat. So I love doing what I do now. But yeah, there was a shift.
That's incredible. So you mentioned you were stuck, and I know lots of us in general, lots of people are stuck in different ways, and each and everyone in their own situation. But quite often we tell ourselves that, you know, it is what it is and we just have to deal with it. And, you know, that's kind of also, I think, what society is telling us, that, you know, we are stuck and it's fine and just deal with it. Man up or woman up.
Yeah.
And, that's life, and, you know, deal with it. To get out of that situation, because obviously it's not nice, even though we've been told to do, you know, to deal with it, it's not nice to be stuck. What would be like the first 2-3 steps that someone could take to move forward and get unstuck?
Sure. Well, one's very simple, very quick one as well that I was just thinking as you were speaking. Sometimes when I feel stuck, I mean, in my life now, health is 1,000% now. So I don't do NLP. I might do it on getting a bit of energy because nowadays, I rock climb all the time, so I get very tired just from normal activities. So I might do it on that. But I will use techniques for other ways in which I get stuck in life because I'm living a very full life now. So I'm suddenly like experiencing all the things that, as you say, different ways in which we get stuck or can do. And yeah, one thing which is very, very simple is to physically just move. And quite often, you might be sat on the couch or you might be, I don't know, somewhere standing in your kitchen and you're mentally just really, really stuck. And sometimes for instance, if you were stood in the kitchen and your brain was, and you were just feeling very frozen, to actually, when there is that awareness, just to physically step away from where you're standing, even to turn around and look back at where you were standing, can help to make a shift, a separation from that space. I mean, it's a very small thing, but that can start to be that kind of just break that power of that place that you were feeling you were in, but actually you would just, as you say, it's like, or it's just like being a bit frozen in that moment. It can feel a bit paralyzing. So to physically step aside, step opposite, turn around, look back, and just notice that distance that you've moved. And then from there, the other thing that I do that for me, I just sort of came up with one day because I was just going through a difficult time last year with a dynamic in my life, and I would have these repetitive thoughts all the time, which we do, those looped thoughts. And it was just getting silly. I've had this throughout my life. Obviously, this is what we do as humans. We have these thoughts that go on loops. And I just heard myself saying to myself, is this thought helping me in any way, shape, or form whatsoever? And that thought just made me laugh because it was like, obviously not. And laughter is really powerful. We use it a lot in NLP, helps to just, like really wake up the brain and break those patterns. And it feels good. So I laughed and it was an absolute no. So that was an immediate like breaking of that repetitive thought from me, just like smashing and then going, is this actually helping me anyway, form, shape or form whatsoever? No. And it broke that power again. But what was really important with this, because that could be enough. It's like, right, cool, move on, crack on, let's do whatever's coming up next. But for me, what was the most important, well, the other half of this, equally important, was to replace that with something else. So there was 2 questions. That was the first one. The answer was no. If the answer is yes, then you're not going to be answering that question. It's going to be a no. The second question was, okay, well, what thought could I have instead that would help me move forward? So with your brain won't come back to you going, well, hang on a second, don't you want to think about that repetitive thought that was making you feel really bad? Your brain's just like waiting for you to give it, to feed it. So when you ask a question like that, what could I have instead? Your brain's going to go, okay, what could you have instead? It's going to make you feel good. That's the important bit, not just what could I have instead? Because it might come back and go, well, yeah, but you were right about this, and then suddenly you're back in that place. So, for instance, it might be, what thought could I have instead? It might be, well, actually, there's this friend that I'm actually seeing tonight, and I'm really excited to see them, and that's going to be such an awesome evening, and I'm so excited, and blah, 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 blah. Or it could be that, it's a beautiful day, whatever it is, but it would be something that would just turn that, whatever that was, into something else. Sounds very simple, but what I would find is, and I remember when I first started doing it, I'd start to have the new thoughts and I'd expand on it and, just let it grow and let it wander and add to it. The first few times I did it, I remember trying to remember what the original thought was that was a repetitive thought. Just for a minute, obviously I didn't want to bring it back, but almost as an experiment, I'd be like, okay, it's gone. What was that thought? Yeah. And I'd stand there going, wow, it's completely gone. Like, okay, I'm just gonna let it go. I'm not gonna keep trying to bring it back. But essentially that just replaced it and became this new sort of structure, as we talk about in NLP, for my mind to move forward on. I like to talk about having a roadmap for our brain, and our language is massively important for creating that roadmap. So what I was doing was creating a really powerful roadmap. My brain was like gone down a new superhighway to happiness. You know,
I see that a lot with my clients who, you know, I have clients who come to me and say, oh, I'm a stress eater, or I'm an emotional eater, or I'm a, you know, a yo-yo dieter. All this kind of stuff are so ingrained, I'd say, and repetitive over time and over the years that, you know, to break that is one of those things that they really need to think, well, you know, and no matter, well, not no matter, but even when I mention, but seriously, yeah, that's what I've always done. And I'm like, yeah, but you can change it if you wanted to. You know, it's not because so far you've been one way or another, you can't become something else. You know, you definitely can. I mean, it wasn't this year, it was last year. I read this book. I've got it downstairs in the library. Neuroplasticity, Power of Neuroplasticity.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's one of those most amazing books that I've read in a long, long time, because it just shows that whatever we think or whatever, you know, we can become and think something differently if we work on it.
Yeah. And we weren't born. I mean, I certainly wasn't born with the human struggles that I've had over my lifetime. You know, so when clients, you know, will often say, I've always blah, 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 I've always this. It's like, always? Are you sure? Always? I love that question. You know, we use that a lot in NLP, that, you know, talking about the different ways people sort of present how they are, and those labels. It's like, you know, I am this, I have ME. I used to say, you know, I have ME. I am in pain, I am blah, blah, blah. And that's the language. We're not taught. I wish we were taught this stuff in schools, but we're not. So we're just using language without understanding how massively impacting it is on our brains. And our brain, as I say, your brain will just go, cool, right, that's what we're thinking, that's what we're going, okay, that's what you want to do, great. It's not going to question it. It's program. It's a computer, and you're programming it with your thinking and your language and your body language, and it would just, you know, come back and be like, yeah, cool, I will give you the chemicals in accordance with what you are saying, with what you are visualizing, you know, with how you're moving around your life. I'll give you those chemicals and I'll help you on your way. So if you're, you know, if you're I often, when I'm explaining NLP or this kind of work to clients and mindset work, you know, I often see, you know, it's like a house for scaffolding. And if that house is built on scaffolding that's of negative or passive language, and or poor expectation of what's going to come, all those difficult, you know, negative things, that house is going to fall. But when you build that house on scaffolding that's created of, you know, strong language, you know, good body language, even if you're going through a really hard time. And I will say that, you know, I've just been through a really big bereavement. I lost my father. So I'm not talking about those times, you know, where things are really, you know, that stuff goes out the window. You're just dealing, getting through day to day. But I know for myself that unless I'm going through something like that, or, you know, many years of chronic illness, 90% of what I perceive to be problems in my life aren't real. They are my brain creating these problems. So it's, you know, harnessing that and being like, okay, are these actually problems, or is this my language? Is this my way of maneuvering through life that's actually creating the way I'm feeling, because it's then feeding my brain. My brain is then giving me these chemicals and setting me off on these paths of poor expectations of what's coming towards me. And actually, you know, as I say, 90% of the time it is.
It's interesting because, you know, I never really paid much attention to mindset or stuff like that until, I don't know, the last few years, I'd say. Let's say the last 8 years, probably.
Sure.
Because, you know, I just went through life and just
got
on with things, you know. And it's only when I started to think about it, I realized actually I have some very positive friends and I have some very negative friends. And, you know, some friends are great to be with because they kind of, you know, help you lift you up. And then some others are so draining. And actually, I never realized why I wanted to be more with one compared to the other, or depending on my mood and stuff like that. So it just goes to show how even your environment that you got has a massive influence on how you react and obviously the messages you put inside yourself as well.
Absolutely, we're influenced by those around us. I mean, that's 100%, isn't it? Now, there's no questioning of that. You know, the conversations that we're having with people. You know, I think back to the conversations, and again, this wasn't because I or we were doing anything wrong. We just didn't know anything different. But the conversations when I was unwell, you know, talking about how difficult things, you know, how awful, you know, how ill I felt, and all those different things, which at the time got me through because I needed to communicate it. But I do know now that so much of that, not all of it, but so much of that was perpetuating, you know, what was going on for me. And that it's, I mean, it's neuroscience. We're not talking hocus pocus magic here. This is actual neuroscience. You know, we know this to be fact now. And yeah, and I should add as well that for anybody watching this, that, you know, it wasn't just a question that I just thought, I'm going to be better, I don't want to be ill anymore, I'm going to be fine. You know, it was it's a very, very specific NLP technique. Again, I talk about NLP more in neuroplasticity in this talk that's on my website, if anyone's interested to know more about it, because it isn't just a case of, you know, I suddenly spoke some affirmations and I was like, right, I am well, I am well, I am well, and bam, I was up, you know, out of a wheelchair and rock climbing. You know, I always say it was the hardest work I ever did, because it took a lot of courage to trust that I wasn't going to get 100 times iller and be hospitalized, because undoubtedly if I had been any iller, I wouldn't have been far off that. So the hardest work I ever did, but the best work I ever did, just doing this, you know, restructuring this, the neural pathways in my brain. And yeah, that sounds very simplistic. There was a lot more to it, but yeah, I just want to be very clear because it is a diagnosis that is very little understood and has a bit of a stigma of being all in the mind. So it wasn't a case of like, oh yeah, it was just all in my mind, I was just making it up. It was just neurologically, it was, you know, that's where it kind of.
Is there a book that's easy accessible to people to learn more about the brain, NLP, or mindset?
So many favorites. I love a couple of authors that I love. This guy called Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I'd always recommend. It's a bit of a Bible, this particular book. You Are the Placebo, but anything by him, really powerful story. Again, he was well, yeah, I won't go into all that, but I would highly recommend him. Also, a great guy called Joe Dispenza, just said him, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote a book which I believe is called The Power of Beliefs, which is one of my favorites. But there's a great podcast with him at the moment with on Feel Good, Live More, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's podcast. So that's the current one I'm listening to at the moment, which is a really interesting podcast with him. Lovely guy.
That'll be my next podcast at the gym. So when I'm at the gym, that's what I listen to. So one of the podcasts I listen to.
Excellent. Well, I'd also recommend, there's a guy called Peter Crone, who is sort of known as the mind architect. And personally, I mean, I'm always recommending him to my clients. Podcast by him. For me, you know, pretty much everything he says, I'm just like, yep. So I'd recommend him as well. But yeah, so many.
Sounds good. So I know you give a lot of talks, and so when someone reaches out to you, what will be your first step? Like what's the process you go through when someone reaches out and say, you know, I really identify with your story, maybe not someone that wants to rock climb or anything, but someone that, you know, needs help and reaches out. What happens then?
Yeah, well, I often get people who have heard about my story and perhaps they're going through, you know, I get a lot of, you know, my friend has fibro for years, can she talk to you, you know? And I always say, or, you know, or me as well, I always say, absolutely, you know, and I always offer a free discovery call, no matter what. So, and that could be, you know, sometimes people come to me because they actually want to be coached. They know that already. For instance, this morning I had a discovery call with a lady and she was coming, she had fibromyalgia, but she was just so like, I want to be coached as well. And, you know, sometimes people are unsure or they don't realize that's going to be right for them. But often, you know, as well, it might be, and I really encourage this person to speak to me, to not feel there's going to be any obligation for coaching, because I am, you know, for me, my purpose, I've discovered. I now know what that word means, finally, which is wonderful. At 47, I now know what that word means. I know what passions have meant all my life, but not the word purpose. But purpose is coaching for me. But there's two halves to it. The one half is coaching clients, the other half is telling the story. So I do a lot of things like this, radio shows and podcasts, and because for me, telling the story just to spread that knowledge of the change that is possible, that I honestly, you know, especially in those last, I don't know, probably half 12 years longer, you know, it became harder and harder to see any light at the end of the tunnel. And, you know, I now have lived five-ish years of full health. And like this whole summer, I've spent 3 or 4 days a week rock climbing outdoors in the I'm going to Spain for a lot of the winter to rock climb and to coach while I'm out you know, not climbing coaching, but coaching as well. So to have the life I have now is just wild. So for me to just, you know, let people know that this is possible. And if they just want to have a conversation about that, that might be all they need, just to hear it from the horse's mouth and have a chat. So there's, yeah, I do encourage that. As I say, no obligation to go on and be coached unless that's right for them. And then we then start to talk about that, and it's very individual. It's not one size fits all for me. You know, it's not an exact science. It's very much down to what's going on with the person, whether it's chronic illness, it could be a phobia. I love working with phobias. To, you know, I've spent the last year working with a sixth form principal of a multi-academy trust in London, and his life's in a very good place, but it's about helping him excel even better in his role. So it's just really, you know, working with what the person's needing in their life.
Do you personally still do like something daily to you know, not just to move you forward, but to hopefully prevent you from going back to where you were? Or
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. I mean, I don't consider that I've ever done that. But that first, say, 8 months or so, I was going through the process of that rewiring of that structure. So, you know, it always used to feel like before going on this course, you know, it was like half a step forward and 50 steps back. You know, everything would be a relapse, you know, no matter what. From going on the course, it felt like, you know, 2 steps forward, cool, another step, great, 3 steps. There was no going back, but it just took a period of time to really, you know, make that change. I'd say from a year on, I wasn't really doing that technique anymore. I haven't done it for old health conditions for 5 years. I don't use it. Occasionally I will use it in my life now because I still know it, obviously. I know it very well from having done it consistently for a year. But occasionally I'll use it for something appropriate in my life. But I use so many different NLP techniques for things in my own life now. I invent stuff, create stuff. I'm very creative, and it's just finding things that work for me and adapting and playing with them, going off piece. So yeah. Does that make sense? But
yeah,
I haven't done it for any health conditions for a very long time. Very happy.
So is there something that everyone could do on a daily basis to try and help improve their life?
I would say, I mean,
easy, simple.
Yeah, again, so many things. I just want to tell you all these different things, but I would say when you know, that for me is language. And it takes work because you have to obviously bring in the awareness and catch your own language. And for some people that would be easier than others, and that might just take a little bit more effort. But just you know, really starting to understand the power of your own language. So obviously we know how our language impacts others, and how things they say to us can impact us negatively and positively. But it's that internal dialogue that for me is like, you know, really, really important. Because as I was saying earlier, the brain hears that, and it will reply.
I can't remember once I knew how many, you know, thoughts went through our head on a hourly basis, but it was something massive.
Now you said that, it's in my talk that is on my website, because I talk about the National Science Foundation. It's something like 60 to 90,000 thoughts a day, and then it's something like my memory's not good, but it's like something like 80% are negative and 90% are the same that you had the day before. It's crazy. So I think it also, just along with that, just very quickly, the way we speak, you can say the same thing in two different ways. So when I'll ask my clients, if when we're working together quite early on, it's like, what do you want in your life instead of what you've currently got, or what do you want to feel, what do you want to have, instead of what you've currently got. And I then explain to them, we have a longer conversation about language, but the importance of how you answer that question. So they might reactively say, oh, I don't want to feel tired anymore. I don't want to feel anxious when I walk in a room full of people. And it's like, great, okay, that's great. But
So
how
what
about
do you want?
yeah, how can you say that? Because obviously I'm hearing what you're saying, that's fine. So we know what you want, but your brain's hearing that as well. And all it's hearing is don't, anxious, or don't want to feel tired, and you're going to be saying it, oh God, I don't want to feel tired anymore. So, it's finding a different way to say the same, express the same thing, but in a way that's like, I want to wake up in the morning feeling good. Basically saying the same thing, but when you say that, it's all you automatically, and I've watched this with clients many times, they'll realize how to say it, and then they'll start to shift, and then they'll smile, because it's like they're saying something really beautiful and positive. I want to wake up feeling good. I want to walk into a room feeling really confident and sure of myself and grounded. And then I'll get them to say both versions, and they go back to saying the original version because I'll have it written down ready, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, no, I get it. Like you're telling the brain the same things, but you're doing it in two very different ways. So that for me is very, very important. When you catch yourself hearing yourself speaking in that way, what's the opposite version of that?
Yeah.
And even if it's hard to say it, it can be hard when you're feeling low and down. There's a real thing about if you smile when you're feeling low, that smile, that movement, your brain, that activates in your brain chemicals in accordance with happiness, because your brain thinks you're happy just from that movement. And I've done this when I've been through low times, where I just smiled or walked down the street feeling really low and smile, and my mood shifts because it's chemical. So yeah, sorry, I could keep going.
No, it's really interesting because quite often as well with my clients and, talking about weight loss, everything is negative. I can't do that, I can't do this, and all the negative stuff. And I'm just like, well, why would you want to do something that's a chore? No one wants to do anything that's perceived. So why do you think it's going to succeed? Let's, as you say, hit it on the head and try and come up with some positives about it. Because otherwise, at some point your brain's going to just say, sod it, I had enough with it.
And I think as well, it's sometimes people might think that then they're not being able to express themselves because they're only used to saying it in a certain way, because that tends to be the way people will naturally go first. It's that, so they might think, well, then I'm not, but then I can't say anything because I can't express how I feel. It's like, no, you can. Or in terms of, I can't express to you what I want because, I'm not able to say that. It's like, no, you can. But it's explaining that actually you are saying the same thing. But it's, and it takes awareness to catch it and do it, and can feel a bit, but once you do it a few times, you're like, actually, this feels so much better, and then it just builds. It builds.
Definitely. I think that's like anything else, awareness is the first stage. Absolutely. And then start doing something to, to make things better.
You build on it, and then the momentum gains. And once you, I think once you realize, once you see those little wins and you notice them, you see the differences, it's very, let's say it the right way around, because I could say it's very hard to stop. So in that I'm saying it's very hard to stop, or I could say it's really easy to keep going. So it's really easy to keep going. I've said the same thing, but two different ways. Let's say it's very easy to keep going because my brain loves hearing the word easy and keep going. Yeah. So there's an example for you.
I love that. That's a great one to I'd say to finish on today. Positive one to finish on today. So if someone, you already mentioned your website, but is there anywhere else that you are quite active, social media or anything? I mean, all the links to get in touch with you will be in the description of the video anyway on YouTube. But is there anywhere else that you are quite active?
I'm not currently very social media active, just by choice, because I have my own sort of feelings about social media. I do use a little bit, but LinkedIn. So if any of your people are on LinkedIn, very active there, part of my sort of networking community. I have Instagram, but the best way to get in contact with me is directly through my website. That's kind of like the base for me. You can go straight to booking a free discovery call. There's a book me, page on there, so you just straight there, or my email's on there as well. But my website, alisonpetty.com, is absolutely the quickest way to get in touch with me.
Any book coming out at some point?
I do get asked that, or TED Talk. The book thing, I feel like it's one of those things that is like the TED Talk. It's there somewhere, but I'm, at the moment I'm really enjoying just doing these kind of talks and radio shows, and just finding my feet with that. And because it's fairly new to me, actually, telling the story. I didn't for quite a long time when I was coaching, because I didn't feel ready. It's like, it's such a personal story. It was only really last year that I started through networking telling it, and then it's like, actually I really need to tell this, and I now feel comfortable to do it, and it's something I do regularly. I just had this year radio show in New York City, which has been really excited. I've done a couple of episodes with them, and so book wise, it's somewhere on the horizon. Just walk my way towards it, or it'll find me. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much. I thought, I always love hearing stories of people that have made a change because, they were in a certain situation and wanted to get out of it. So always massively, massively inspiring. So thanks for being a fabulous guest on the show. For anyone that hasn't subscribed yet on the show, please do, so you'll be notified of any upcoming episodes. And if you haven't watched the previous ones, we talked about lots of different subjects so far, but somehow there's always a new subject to cover. So thank you very much, and I'll see you all very soon.
Thank you, Anne.